All right, looks like people are in. So welcome everybody to this meeting of Carpinteria Birdwatchers for whatever today is, September 19th, 2024. Tonight's meeting is on birding in Asia with our special guest presenter, Courtney Purcell, who is here, ready to talk. And we'll get to that in just a minute. First, a few quick announcements. One is that in light of recent history, we have instituted a new procedure for the Zoom portion of the meeting. Participants will not have their cameras enabled and will not have their audio enabled. You're welcome to participate via the chat. You can send questions that way or comments. We'll work out the details. Maybe we'll have people that will enable their video or unmute them. But for the meantime, we're just going to treat you as sort of a silent audience in the interest of keeping the meeting orderly. And then the second announcement is that this Saturday, we will have our monthly Carpinteria Birdwatchers outing, and we will be going to Carpinteria Creek. It's fall migration time, and Carpinteria Creek is a well-known local migrant trap where cool fall vagrants can be found. So there are details about that at carpbirdwatchers.org, but basically we're meeting on 6th Street by the Lou Grant Parent-Child Workshop near the Carpinteria Sanitary District offices. Should be plenty of parking there along 6th Street, but that's at 8 a.m. on Saturday. And should be a lot of fun. So with that said, I will go ahead and share my screen to show Courtney's presentation and invite Courtney to come on up and take my place. And let's see, I think I want to share this. And I believe there will be no video, so that's fine. All right, usually I would appeal to someone in the Zoom meeting to give me a thumbs up if the sharing is working, but I'm going to assume it's working correctly since I can't see people in the sharing. All right, it is working. Excellent. All right, well, welcome, Courtney, and I will put this in full screen, I think will work, and you should be in business. If we have any technical problems, we'll solve them when we get there.
Okay, thanks, John. So I use the arrows to turn it. Okay. Let me just take a minute to get acquainted. Usually when I give a presentation, I'm used to looking at the screen, so I have to kind of remind myself to acknowledge people in Zoom land. I'm actually kind of glad that we have a pretty modest turnout tonight, because I was talking to Dion, my wife, and saying, I think it was about 6 or 8 weeks ago when John had asked me I'd mentioned spending a lot of time in Asia. He said, did you see any birds over there? And I said, yeah, we saw a lot of birds. Would you be interested in giving a presentation on the bird watching you did in Asia? And I said, okay, yeah, that sounds good. And then fast forward to a month ago when Paul Lehman gave a fantastic presentation that's full of science and data and all these things. And I just thought, my presentation is going to be preposterous in comparison, because Deanna and I are not formal, particularly knowledgeable bird watchers or birders, right? I mean, we started bird watching in 2015. And we complement each other quite nice, I think, in that I have a good eye for spotting birds, and I really like studying their behaviors, but she's kind of the one that's better at identifying birds and things like that. So when we come together, we have a really nice time, but we're not focused on the science. We're focused on the fun of it and just going out and seeing how many birds we can find and getting reconnected with the species we're familiar with and so on and so forth. So that being said, with respect to this presentation, I think I want to start out by mentioning a few things. It's only 50% maybe about birds, and 50% is going to be like a travelogue talking about all this time we spent in Asia. We visited 15 different countries over the course of like 14 months in Asia. And yes, we did a lot of birding, but that absolutely was not the primary reason why we were there. So there'll be lots of stories sprinkled in and plenty of stories about birds too. Also, I want to say a few words about photos. One, because our primary purpose was not birding, a lot of the birds we saw were incidental. We just happened to be like, oh, what's that cool bird? And maybe she had her binoculars in her backpack or something like that. And we got to look at it. We didn't go there for the purpose of taking bird photos. Even when we're local, we don't take bird photos, right? So all of the bird photos we're going to see are off of eBird. So I'll put that disclaimer out there on the front end. And also, even the non-bird photos I'm going to share, are photos that I had taken, posted on Facebook back when I had a Facebook account, and then deleted. So I had to kind of snapshot them. So they're of poor quality. I wasn't envisioning giving a presentation. We're just enjoying ourselves. So I harvested whatever we had, and I present that to you tonight. So let's move forward. So we're going to start with Thailand. So even though we traveled across 15 different countries in Asia, our base was in Thailand. Specifically, we lived in Bangkok, but we were not there on a particular visa or any visa at all. We were based there, but every 30 days we had to leave Thailand in order to come back and get stamped in for 30 more days. So that was a perfectly convenient excuse to go somewhere every month, go on another trip. So every month or every 3 weeks, we'd go somewhere for a week or 10 days or sometimes longer. We'll talk about that, to visit another country and explore the birds and other things there. So we're going to start off in Thailand because that was our home base for the vast majority of the time we were there. So of course, we'll start off with some scenery about Thailand. This is a place called Erawan Falls in Erawan National Park in Kanchanaburi, which is in the western side of central Thailand, sort of up against the Myanmar-Burmese border. A fabulous area with all these 7 tiers of fantastic waterfalls. This is one of our Burmese friends who we traveled with there, posing in front of the highest waterfall there up at the top in this national park. But because we're here for birds, let's get into some of the birds we saw. This Eurasian hoopoe, and of course we saw a lot of birds while we were in Asia, so I won't talk about each one of them, but this was probably the most striking bird we first saw when we were there. I had no idea what it was, but it was there in a field, and of course, this is a very peculiar bird. I don't think we have anything even remotely like it in the US. Very peculiar look. So I think we saw that first time. We may have seen on one other occasion perhaps, but this is not a common bird at all, but we were really happy to see it. These guys, there are a variety of different bee eaters we saw throughout Southeast Asia in particular. The chestnut-headed, I think we saw in the north of Thailand, less common than a couple of the others that we'll see later on, but magnificently colored. Now, when we first started spending time in Southeast Asia, we'd done birding down in Latin America, places like Costa Rica and places like that. And I thought I'd expected to see more birds that were brilliantly colored like you see in places like Costa Rica, and we didn't, but that doesn't mean they didn't exist at all. I mean, after all, this is a fantastic bird. So a lot of these birds we're seeing here, we found through the good fortune of making the connection with a man in northern Thailand named Utai. Utai is a Thai man he's a birder, and he takes people out for a fairly hefty fee by Thai standards. I don't know if anybody participating tonight has ever spent time in Thailand, but it's really, really inexpensive, generally speaking. People living in the north of Thailand, for example, $300 a month is a comfortable lifestyle, for all their expenses. So I think we spent $300 for the day to go bird watching with this guy, which is a really high price. But in any case, this local man is a really solid birder. And I think he took us out for maybe 12 hours or something. We visited maybe 10 different sites around northern Thailand, just blasting all over the place. He picked us up maybe at 5 o'clock in the morning or something. And I think he helped us find a good 80 species or something that day, which of course, this is earlier on in our travels. And the vast majority of those, say 80 species, were probably life birds for us. I remember seeing this bird in particular in Doi Intanon National Park. It's a national park that kind of houses the tallest mountain in Thailand, which is not very tall. It never gets snow. It's maybe 2,000 or 3,000 feet high. These Asian openbills are really peculiar birds. We see them all over the place. They're sort of like our turkey vultures in a sense that you see them flying all over. They're perched in trees. And of course, they're quite large birds. This pink-necked green pigeon was a bird that's been on my radar for a long time. I don't know, I'm not really drawn to pigeons, but for some reason I was like, I want to see a green pigeon. I'd never seen one before. It was only within the last couple of months before we finally left Asia that we finally were in a tree one day in this park right in the middle of Bangkok. We'll talk more about birding in Bangkok shortly, but there was this green pigeon in a tree. But speaking of pigeon and dove type creatures, we actually had a legitimate Eurasian collar dove, of course, many of them over there, which I thought it was interesting, like, oh, another Eurasian collar dove. And we put it in eBird, it pops up as a life bird. It's like, life bird? Oh yeah, this one's actually legit. Like this actually belongs here. But in any case, so I'll talk now about this green pigeon, where we found it. So as I said, we are based out of Bangkok, Thailand, which is a big city of about 16 million people, but they have fantastic green spaces in the middle of this big sprawling city. And a couple of parks in particular that we used to primarily go birding, like maybe almost weekly, we'd go there to go look at birds. And we saw great birds. And we connected with a local Thai man, a young guy who was, I don't know, maybe 25 years old or something, who was really into birding, very knowledgeable. And we hired him one day. We just put it out there. would you guide us if we paid you a fee? And he's like, okay. And we gave him, I think, the equivalent of 50 or $60 or something like that. And he took us out for a few hours. And he was really good. And even though we'd gone birding in this very park in the middle of Bangkok many, many times, I think in about 2 hours, he helped us find maybe another 70 species or something like that, just in a park in the middle of Bangkok. And he told us a few days earlier, he'd gone birding in another part of Bangkok. And I was floored when he said this. Birding, mind you, in the city, the sprawling metropolis of Bangkok, he had 101 species day in the city of Bangkok. That's remarkable, right? So there's good birding, but we never had anything better than about 70 species, other than the north of Thailand. We had maybe a few more. It's always a joy to see kingfishers. I always appreciate seeing them. And on our travels across Asia, we saw quite a large number of them. These racket-tailed treepies, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing treepie correctly. Maybe somebody can correct me, but I think that's what it is. I think when we first saw this, maybe we only saw one or two of them on our travels. We were in the north of Thailand, and we stayed in this beautiful villa for a couple of months, and it was absolutely fantastic. We saw the usual sorts of birds that became kind of our local birds after 2 months. It's kind of like, oh, it's one of those again. Where here, if we saw one, it'd be like, oh, I can't believe that was here. But there it's kind of like, another California towhee or something like that. But one day I saw a really big bird with a really, really long tail kind of fly across, out in front of the villa one day and land in this tree. And then I lost sight of him. And I eventually figured out it was one of these guys. And they're really, really cool. And of course, they're really exotic. But we didn't only spend our time in Thailand. So I want to talk a little bit about Japan. I could probably talk at length about Japan. It happens to be my favorite country on the planet. It's absolutely fantastic. So we've been to Japan many, many times, but on this last trip while we were there, we actually went to Japan for 2 months because we want to do a 700-mile walk around Japan. We literally walked 15 miles a day for 49 days around Japan. And it was, despite the blistered feet and all that, it was fantastic. And our primary purpose was not looking at birds, but of course we did a lot of birding anyway. But our primary purpose there was to do this big walk. This was not part of the walk. This is just a very famous statue called the Kamakura Buddha, kind of southwest of Tokyo. But we're on an island called Shikoku in the far southwest of Japan. And this is what Shikoku looks like along the coastline. It's a really beautiful area. So as we're walking these 720 miles, actually, we walked completely around the outside edge of the island of Shikoku. And it was really great because in times we're along the seacoast like this, other times we're up in the mountains or walking through agricultural areas or through cities. And because we had a lot of walking ahead of us, we couldn't stop to look at birds per se, but we saw a heck of a lot of really good birds along all those days and hours of walking. This is one of the temples that we visited up in the mountains. I had to climb up this incredibly steep staircase to get up to like this little shrine up on the side of the mountain. And sometimes when we were walking, we walked trails like this through the forest, and it just went on for days and days, and it was really, really great. Of course, the highlight for me was probably seeing a mandarin duck, because after all, they're maybe the most fantastic bird ever, certainly that I've ever seen. And so I always thought, am I ever going to get to see a mandarin duck? As much time we spent in Asia, never saw a mandarin duck. But when we were in Japan, we happened to go to this beautiful museum one day. It was a really rainy day, and there was this pond out there, and it was really cold. It was, I think, early December. And it was really cold, but I saw across the pond, and I saw these ducks, and I thought, my vision's not that good, but boy, this looked like mandarin ducks to me. It looks like about 30 of them. And sure enough, they were mandarin ducks. It was like, finally, mandarin ducks. And legit, not like seeing them in Orange County or something, And so it was really cool to see mandarin ducks. And so for me, that was maybe a highlight. But of course, this little Japanese pygmy woodpecker is great. I still remember when I saw this little guy, or the Japanese pygmy. It was on a pine tree right along the coast in Shikoku while we're on this big walk. And I couldn't help but seeing this little tiny, tiny, cute little woodpecker doing what woodpeckers do in the pines. And it was easy to identify. There's really nothing like it in that part of Japan. This particular bird, I think, is worth mentioning only because it kind of felt like the mallard of Japan. I mean, they're everywhere. At first, when you first see them, like, oh, that's kind of a cool bird, life bird the first time. And then when you see it every day for the next 6 weeks, it's like, oh, it's kind of like a mallard in a sense. We saw the copper pheasant. We only saw one on our travels. I remember we were up in the mountains. We were near the end of the 700-mile walk. And suddenly I saw this movement in the trees. So we had to watch out for things like wild boar. They had these incredibly aggressive wild boar that are dangerous, can kill a human being there. And so anytime we see something big moving in the forest around us, we naturally became a little concerned. But this time it was just a copper pheasant. And it was really beautiful because another bird that was pretty easy to identify. We didn't need binoculars. He ran out in front of us on the trail. He was 10 or 15 feet in front of us, got a really good look at him before he disappeared again. So I think the next slide after this gray wagtail is the white wagtail. I seem to remember a white wagtail showed up at Ledbetter Beach a number of years ago, and Dion and I went out there trying to capture it and trying to see it, and we never did. I think it was gone. It'd been out there I think a few days in a row or something. I forget, but I remember going out there and being like, oh, it's gone. When we got to Japan, well, they're all over the place. I mean, we didn't see them daily, but when you see them like in an open field or something, there'd be like 20 of them, and then the next day you see another 20. So after a while, it's like, okay, we not only got a white wagtail, but we got lots of white wagtails. And the gray wagtail, I think, is probably more plentiful, but there are a lot of both of those particular birds there. So after our big walk in Japan, we went back to Thailand because, as I said, that was our home base. And so as we traveled around Thailand, we had opportunities to see more than just birds. This thing behind me is kind of in the family, I guess, of Komodo dragons, which you may be familiar with in Indonesia. And so these guys are all over the place. Yes, even the city of Bangkok, where this is where we are in a public park in Bangkok. I had no idea this guy was here. And sometimes they can be aggressive. Usually it's sort of skittish, but usually they just kind of treat you like you don't exist. You could be sitting here on a bench in a park and the thing might walk right next to you or between your legs or something like that. And they're quite big. They can be 6, 7 feet long. But we were walking in this park and I stopped to stretch and I was kind of leaning up against this little railing behind me and I'm stretching, had no idea until I turn around that this sleeping quote unquote Komodo dragon is like right behind me, and knowing that they can be aggressive. And of course they have all this bacteria in their mouth. So if they bite you, like that could be a really nasty infection. So I thought, this is not good, but since I'm here and he appears to be sleeping, let me take a quick selfie with him. And so I couldn't resist taking a picture of a crocodile on the barbecue. This is one of the big malls we went to in Bangkok, and I thought, is that actually a crocodile? And sure enough, people are going getting shavings of meat off of it. And so I thought, well, that's worth a picture. So getting back to the birds of Thailand, this red-wattled lapwing, I still remember seeing this bird in a town, a place called Ayutthaya, about an hour or so, hour and a half north of Bangkok. It's an very old historic, like ruined city. And amongst the ruins there, sometimes you see really cool birds, including the red-wattled lapwing. This streak spider hunter was actually in the north of Thailand when we hired that guy named Utai I talk about. We were up in the mountains and he helped us spot this beautiful little guy. The stone chats were real common in Bangkok, right there in the city. We'd see them from time to time. And this guy too, we'd see them pretty regularly right in the city there. So there was a particular park that I've alluded to that we spent a lot of time birding at in Bangkok, and it's called Benchikiti Park. And Benchikiti Park is a magnificent place that has a variety of habitats. They have wetlands. They have a big, just straight out pond with manicured gardens. They have open grasslands. They have kind of orchard areas. I mean, it's a really amazing place, even with elevated walkways that you can walk over the canopy and look down into the wetlands. I mean, it's really amazing. And it goes on for, I don't know, that even the elevated walkway must be the better part of a mile long. I mean, it's a really big park with a beautiful system. It's not designed for bird watching. It's a wetlands primarily, but it happens that every once in a while there are birders. There was mainly just me and Dion, and occasionally we see some random birder, but usually it was just us out there. And one day we were out there, somebody said to us, hey, have you guys seen the owlets? And we're like, owlets here? And they're like, well, let me tell you where they've been seen. And sure enough, there's a group of, I think, we only ever saw 4, but I think there are 5 owlets that are there all the time. And so after we learn where they are, then every time we go there, let's go visit the owlets and see what they're up to. And of course, they're really, really cute and hard to see. But once you know they're in the same 2 trees every single time, it's just a matter of looking and peeking in holes till eventually you see the little owlet staring at you. I don't know how big they are. It's hard to get a sense, but I feel like they're maybe the size of your hand or something. I mean, they're little tiny guys. So On one of our trips where it seemed appropriate, or we were kind of forced to leave Thailand when the 30 days is up, let's go to Cambodia. And I have to say, going into Cambodia, I'd never been to Cambodia before. I wasn't expecting much, to be honest. I was expecting to be let down, but actually, Cambodia is a really nice place. We really, really liked it. We didn't have a comprehensive experience of Cambodia. We visited two primary places. The first one is called Siem Reap, which is where the famous Angkor Wat is located. All the famous kind of ruined temples, Buddhist and Hindu temples are there. And then after that, we went to Phnom Penh, which is the capital. And there's much I could say just about Cambodia. It's a really, really neat place. I was definitely really impressed by it on many levels. Many novel things about it as well. We stayed in Siem Reap. We stayed in a really neat little hostel that had a beautiful little balcony out front. And one day I was out on the balcony and I was just kind of looking around looking for birds because there was like kind of a pasture land or grassland right out the balcony. I was looking for birds. And so I walked to one end of the balcony right opposite our front door of our little room there. And I looked down and there happened to be a crocodile farm. I mean, talking 20 feet away from our front door where there were hundreds of crocodiles. And I thought, boy, I hope they don't escape, you know. So that first slide I just showed was of the famous Angkor Wat. And this is what is it called? Bayonne, I think it's called, which is not far from there, and Taprom. These are kind of the three primary famous ruin sites around there. We spent an entire day going birding just around these ruin sites. It was kind of an excuse to spend more time at the ruins, but we went out there specifically to go looking for birds around there. And we didn't see a lot of birds, but we did see some pretty cool birds. And that's not a great segue because this great hornbill was actually in Phnom Penh, which is like a 5 or 6 hour bus ride away. Right, there's this kind of hill right in the middle of the city with this ancient temple or this old temple on it. And they had these big trees making the big trees with all these big birds making all this noise. And we went up there and it's the great hornbills, which are huge, huge birds. I mean, they're really, really big. And then the same trees, you had these wreathed hornbills. So two species of hornbills right there in the trees. But the great hornbills were absolutely massive. Looks like somebody sort of wants to come in. Somebody's peeking through the window. Sorry about that. This gray-headed canary flycatcher is another pretty common bird we saw not only in Cambodia, but we'd see in Thailand as well. Variety of sunbirds that we saw on our travels throughout Southeast Asia. Not common birds, but we would see them not infrequently. Maybe every other outing, we'd see some type of sunbird. So I talked about the bee eaters earlier on. The blue-tailed is a pretty common one. You'd see almost daily. You know, they sit on wires, telephone lines, that sort of thing, and you just see them up there. And they're super recognizable because they have that distinctive shape. And they have this, the different varieties have slightly different tails, but they always kind of have a really sort of obvious either pointed tail or a long kind of funky-looking tail. And of course, they're really, really comfortable or adorable and charming. But when you see them without binoculars, you don't really get a sense of just how amazing they are. But when you have binoculars, which hopefully you do, you see they look absolutely fantastic. Really, really good birds. These black-naped orioles are really, really common. I don't know specifically when they pass through Bangkok, but we saw them there a lot. Not unlike orioles here, where you may not see them every day, but you see them most days, and you often see several of them. These drongos, as spectacular as they are, I don't know. I feel like these birds are maybe 18 or 24 inches long. So they're good sized birds. That's including the length of the tail, maybe a little bit longer if you consider the tail length. But as exotic and cool as they are, they're not uncommon. You actually see them pretty regularly. So that's kind of a treat. But after a while, you see these birds so many times, it's kind of like, oh, another one of those again, you know. These little flower peckers are really cool. You see a lot of these also around Bangkok, just doing what these little guys do, buzzing around and flying around in bushes and doing their thing, looking for flowers and that sort of thing. So I also had an opportunity to go to India while I was there. Dion did not join me. I had an opportunity to join kind of a private group of people. Specifically, I was invited to join a group of about 25 Buddhist monks who wanted to go on a pilgrimage visiting all these Buddhist holy places in the north of Thailand. And a friend of mine put me in touch with the person who was organizing the trip. And she said, well, yeah, you're welcome to come with us, but you're from America. I think you probably won't be comfortable. Well, what do you mean by that? You know, I've been traveling all over Asia. She's like, have you ever been to India? Well, No, I've never been to India. Well, India is a special place, So, we're only going to be eating Thai food. I'm like, but I thought you said we're going to India. I found out that Thai people don't like Indian food. And maybe that's not fair to say, but that's what I observed in my 10 days in India is I never saw any Thai people eat any Indian food. So what we did was we traveled this whole entourage from Thailand. We packed hundreds of pounds of Thai food with us and traveled to India and always prepared every meal for ourselves. And I actually had Thai people tell me, I don't want Indian food. I don't want Indian food. I don't know why that is, but that was my experience. But in any case, I still wasn't sure why she said, I don't know if you like India. Well, I found out in a sense, okay, because maybe you don't like eating so much Thai food because Thai food tends to be very spicy. But I reminded them many times, well, I've been living in Thailand for months now. I think I got that. Well, also, we're going to be sleeping on the floor every night because we sleep in monasteries. We're not staying in hotels. We'll go to Buddhist monasteries in very poor areas, and we're just going to sleep on the floor and like monks do because we're traveling with a bunch of monks. And it was a nice trip, except for I'm not sure what the illness was. It might have been COVID or it might have been something else. But within about 3 days, our entire entourage was sick and people were mad at me because I was the first one to show symptoms. So I must have given it to them. So literally at least 20 people, I'd say, were like super, super ill within about 3 days after I started having a sore throat. So that tainted the experience a little bit, but I did have a chance to see some birds in India and cows, lots and lots of cows in India. So these Indian rollers are really, really neat. We'd see a lot of these in Thailand as well. Really, really colorful. And I feel like this picture makes it look like the Indian rollers are really small, but actually they're big. They're really noticeable birds. So when they fly, which is the easiest way to kind of recognize, oh, there's an Indian roller, the color is very distinctive. That teal or whatever you call it is very, very distinctive in flight, but they're also big. I mean, I wouldn't say they're as big as a crow, but they're close. They're bigger than a robin. They're good sized birds and they're very, very colorful and they're quite common. You see them a lot. And the jungle babbler, I still remember when I started seeing these guys. These guys are like the California towhees of India and Nepal. They're all over the place. They're just kind of hop out from underneath the bush and, they kind of peck around on the ground and then they disappear again. And so I would see the jungle babblers. I think I was the only one in my entourage who paid any attention to birds at all. It was a treat to see a couple of these guys. I didn't expect it at all. We're again in the north of India in a very remote, really poor area. And we climbed up this hill where there's some ruins from kind of the history of the life of the Buddha. We were visiting an ancient kind of temple site. And we were on the hill. I looked down in this bog, this swamp on the other side of the hill, and I saw a couple of these guys in the hill, or excuse me, in the bog. I feel like, yeah, okay. The top of the screen is hiding the fact that this should say Nepal. So now we have entered Nepal. So we actually traveled about 1,000 miles in a bus across India, then went up into Nepal. We didn't spend a lot of time there, so we didn't see a lot of birds. Now, bear in mind, even though I'm not showing a lot of birds from each country, it doesn't mean we didn't see many birds. A lot of it are just repeats. It's the same general region, same part of the world. So a lot of it are repeats. So I'm trying to not repeat any photos or whatever. And some of the birds, like I didn't bother putting in here a picture of a Eurasian collared dove or something like that, because I'm just like, I'm pretty sure no one really wants to see that or feels the need to see that. So we saw many more birds than we're showing here. In Nepal, for instance, I might only have just a couple of pictures, including the rose-ringed parakeet, which is really, really great. The Oriental honey buzzard, I have just a short anecdote about this bird. For the life of me, I kept confusing the Oriental honey buzzard with I think it was the black kite when we were in Japan. These birds are all over the place. And I can never remember which one was which, and maybe I should know better, but for whatever reason, I couldn't. So I just said, you know what? I don't care what they're called. I'm just going to start referring to them as sea eagles. Mind you, they're not sea eagles, but I just decided I don't know what else to call them. I'm just going to call them sea eagles because I'd see them along the coast all the time. Anyhow, it was really great to see them because these Oriental honey buzzards, or quote unquote sea eagles, are really big and they're really loud. They make this kind of like annoying kind of scream all the time, but they're everywhere. They're soaring around, they're perching on trees and on power lines and things like that. So even though this was in Nepal, where I'm kind of capturing this moment, we saw them all over Japan in particular, really, really common in Japan. And it was nice to see an Indian pond heron up in that part of the world because in Thailand, we would see when you see pond herons in the north of Thailand, it's never really clear whether they're Indian pond herons or Chinese pond herons. So we'd always have to do the whole slash one or the other. But when we were finally up in Nepal and India, it became more obvious, okay, because they don't have the Chinese pond herons there. They just have the Indian pond herons, or so I was informed. And the coppersmith barbet is a really cute little guy, as you can see. And all over Asia, especially in Southeast Asia, we would occasionally see them, but mostly hear them. And their sound is so distinctive, you would never guess that it's a bird. I certainly can't mimic it or try to recreate it, but it's almost like a beep, 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 beep. And it's very insistent. It just goes on and on and on and on, like a drop of water that's pop, 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 over and over. And once you learn the sound, you're like, that's what it is. And then you hear it everywhere. These coppersmith barbets are all over the place, but you don't see them all that much, but you hear them all the time. And I mentioned the racket-tailed drongo earlier. Here's the black drongo. Very similar. They both have the really long, elaborate tails. They're really, really beautiful. And so now, next slide is transitioning us to China. And so a lot of our friends are from China, but we'd never been to China before. And we wanted an opportunity to go. And so while we were over there, spent all this time in Asia, we thought, you know what, let's get visas to China, because everyone essentially needs a visa. Certainly Americans need a visa to go to China. I thought, you know, while we're here, let's go ahead and apply to the Chinese embassy in Bangkok. Let's get visas to go visit China, except for you can't. China requires that you apply from a visa from your home country. Well, we're in Asia. We're not going to go home just to go get a visa and then come back. But then one of our Chinese friends who had been visiting family in Beijing, she was leaving and she sent me a message one day, and it was actually just a photo, and it was Chinese characters, and apparently it was at the airport, a sign she saw. And that's all she sent me was this photo of Chinese characters. I'm like, I don't know what that says. And she says, look, I think you may be able to visit China. I said, well, what does it say? She says, it's saying that China has a new visa-free transit policy that certain nationalities are allowed to use. So I did all this research, and it was all ambiguous and unclear, and it really worked out great. So certain nationalities, including American citizens, certain nationalities, if certain very specific criteria are met, you can actually enter China for up to 6 days without a visa, but you have to meet very specific criteria. When I was researching this, I was going on YouTube looking at videos and whatnot, and people are saying like, oh, it doesn't work. We got stranded. Like they bought tickets. They flew all the way to, say, Beijing, and then they got denied entry to the country because they didn't meet the criteria, because it's all this red tape. It has to be, it has to be precisely as it's written into their law. But we decided, you know what? Let's go for it. I think we got this. I think we met all the criteria. And what's the worst thing that happens? We get turned back and we just have to buy a ticket to somewhere else. Okay, so it costs some money. Not that we're happy if that happens, but let's just go for it. And so we got there and we landed in China. So far, so good. We landed in China, and before we could even get off the plane, officials came on the plane, saw the only 2 Americans, or only 2 Western people on the entire flight. Come with us. We're like, uh-oh. I mean, really, it's like, come with us. But he was actually, the person was really, really friendly, barely spoke any English, but kind of walked with us. And it took us a while to realize that his job, so the system had flagged that Americans were traveling without a visa to China. Even as we checked in, their system was already notified. And so when we got there, his job was to ease our transition through Chinese immigration. It was so easy. I swear we jumped the line in front of all the other people. And within about 30 minutes, there we are. We're in China. And it was absolutely fantastic. And so we had a fantastic time in China. I was absolutely blown away. I know a lot of people, you hear a lot of things about China in the media, and people have varying opinions. We were very impressed by China. We loved China. It was fantastic. But a Chinese hike, and this is where we're talking about a little bit, a Chinese hike is not like the sort of hike you might find if you're, on Jesus Trail or Franklin Trail or something around here. So one of our friends who lives in China, she said, hey, sometimes I go hiking with this group of people. You want to go on a group hike with me? Okay, yeah, let's do it. This is what it looked like. It was a huge, and even in all fairness, our friend even said, like, I've never seen a group that big. It was a huge group. It ended up being like 3 Greyhound buses full of people. And we traveled, I don't know, it seemed like several hours to get to this site. And so what we're doing here is we must have traversed about 3 miles of cliffs and rugged shoreline right along the ocean here. This is in the South China Sea, I think it was. And so you have all these areas where like you have women in heels in like nice dresses and you have children and they're literally scrambling on the rocks. At one point, one or two people like fell in the water. I mean, they only fell 3 feet or something, but people are peeling off the rocks as they couldn't hold on. They're falling in the water. I'm thinking in the US, people, there, be threats of lawsuits and things like that, but people are laughing and having a great time. And so it was fun and everybody survived. One person did, I think, get injured and they had to be like hoisted onto a speedboat or something, came and somebody managed to get in a call. They got in the boat and took her off to get first aid or something like that, but everybody survived. So anyhow, what about birds of China? This green-billed malkoa, I think that's probably how you say it. We also saw one of these in Ayutthaya, that cool ruinous town or city I told you about an hour north of Bangkok. Another bird that is very, very striking. They're on the ground, extremely long tails. I feel like these birds, I don't know, they're probably maybe the better part of 3 feet long or something like that. They're quite long birds and really, really striking with that brilliant kind of crimson around the eye is really amazing. And I mentioned all the sunbirds. I don't know how many varieties there are. I don't know how plentiful they are, but maybe half a dozen or something that we saw over the course of our travels in Asia, including this beautiful fork-tailed. And the plaintive cuckoo is a bird we saw throughout Asia, really quite distinctive. I can't remember now. I think this was the male. I don't remember. The female, I think, looked different, but I can't remember how they differed. But we would see these guys almost daily when we would go walking. But this is a bird that we literally would see and hear daily throughout Asia, particularly in Southeast Asia. This bird, Asian quail, and I know it's pronounced quail because it's named for the sound it makes. And they're really, really loud. They're kind of like crows. They look sort of like crows. They act like crows. They're extremely boisterous and they're extremely obnoxious. And they're super loud and they almost scream, quail, quail, quail. And it's constant and it's incessant. And you don't have to be in a park or out in the wilderness to see or hear one. You can be in your apartment in Bangkok and you hear them screaming outside. It's all over the place. So Asian quail. So then we also spent time in Indonesia, which is a really neat place. I don't know how many people participating tonight have spent time in Bali, Indonesia. That's the only part of Indonesia we've ever been. Before we went, we're trying to decide like where in Indonesia do we want to go? I mean, Indonesia is a big, big country and it goes on forever. It's sprawling. And it's not only, I mean, it's just this whole collection of islands primarily, some of them quite large, including places like Borneo. But we decided to go to Bali because it's kind of the obvious place to go. So we spent time in Bali visiting everything but the tourist sites. I have never been drawn to tourist places. I'm just not into them. Like if I go to like Paris, the last place I want to go is the Eiffel Tower. And when we were in Paris, we did not go to the Eiffel Tower. I did go to the Louvre in all fairness, but I try to avoid places like that. And Bali is famous for having amazingly beautiful Instagram-worthy places to visit. And Deanna and I talked about it. I'm like, you know what? They're going to be so crowded. We heard about one place and we saw a picture like, oh, that looks absolutely fantastic, beautiful. And then I read the people like, yeah, that picture looks fantastic, but you should know that you have to stand in line 3 hours to get an opportunity to take that picture because they actually make you line up single file and stand in line. So I said, how about this? How about the time we spent in Bali? How about if we do something really unorthodox and make a point to visit not one single tourist site? Can we actually do that? And that's what we did. And we had a great time. So what did we do? The hostel we stayed at, we asked them to arrange a driver for us. We hired a driver for half a day or whatever it was, or a day, and said, take us places where no tourists go, where we can maybe look at birds. And he took us out in the middle of nowhere down lonely country roads. And we had our binoculars. We're just walking around looking for birds. We did go to this old ruinous site, which was really neat, but he took us there really early in the morning. He says, I promise I'll take you early. There won't be any tourists around. And so we went there and we walked around and this guy came out of the jungle at one point, and it's very jungly there. He came out of the jungle. I mean, the whole thing like a loincloth, almost like carrying a spear sort of thing. I don't think he actually had a spear, but he had a machete. And he comes out of the jungle and it felt very authentic, right? But I was about to get duped and I didn't even know it. And so he comes out of the jungle and we're the only people around. It's just me and Dion and the jungle guy. And he's got these coconuts and he starts like banging them on the ground. And he's taking this machete to hack it open. I'm like, this guy's, looking for food. He's trying to survive here. And he opens one and he hands it to us almost like a gift. And he's like, puts his hand out like for a little money or something. I thought, okay, you know, he might want 50 cents or something for it. I think he wanted the equivalent of $10 for it. I'm like, $10. So we paid for it, we took it, and you know, and of course, 2 swallows and the coconut water is gone, and then you feel kind of stupid, like you got taken, because after all, in another hour, this place is swarming with tourists, and he knew the whole drill. So that's what happens or can happen in places like Bali, especially if you're ignorant, like I can be. But Bali was really cool. We had the brown-throated sunbird. It was really great. We had really good birds around Bali, really nice, including the Javan kingfishers. And I said earlier about kingfishers. I mean, who doesn't love kingfishers? I mean, I really, really like kingfishers, and this is a particularly beautiful one. Another beautiful sunbird. And again, some of these places we don't take many photos because maybe that wasn't our primary interest, or we saw more koels, we saw more, you know, whatever. So we also had the good fortune to spend time with a friend of ours in Taiwan, and it was really, really great. She and her husband teach Tai Chi here in Santa Barbara, actually. And they said, well, what we like to do periodically is we like to take our Tai Chi students to Taiwan, where they're from, and we like to ask them to compete over there. There's an opportunity to compete, but also to kind of see our homeland, Taiwan. And so I said, hey, we don't do Tai Chi, but any chance we might be able to join your group? And of course, our friend said, yeah, you're welcome to join. And so we went over there for, I forget it was 12 days or something like that, and toured around a lot of the north and then kind of along the east side of Taiwan. We didn't get to see a lot of the country, but I will give 2 big thumbs up to Taiwan. Anybody who's not been there, really, Taiwan is absolutely exquisite. You know, among the very best countries in Asia, in my not totally informed opinion, Taiwan, Japan, and China are absolutely among the cream of the crop. I mean, really, in South Korea. I mean, really, really fantastic countries with a lot of diversity and really interesting things there. Taiwan in particular is clean, it's safe, it's beautiful, it's got a rich, rich culture, and there's great birds there too. Taiwan was really, really fantastic, including places like this old temple with these waterfalls, like something you'd see out of like some ancient like painting on a scroll or something hanging in a museum. But these places are real. I mean, we're in this national park and this is what we see. I'm like, this is like something out of like a painting or something. This beautiful gorge that we did kind of a little bit of a, not really a hike, but a walk along the edge of this gorge is really fantastic. And of course, we saw this Taiwan blue magpie. We saw a few different varieties of magpies while we were in Asia, but the Taiwan blue was particularly striking, as you can see here. So we had the white rump muni, and I think we indeed did see plenty of scaly-breasted muni over there as well. Needless to say, I didn't bother putting pictures of those guys in here, but the white rump I thought was kind of novel for us. So you may have noticed there aren't many pictures of raptors, and we did not see many at all, particularly in Bangkok. You know, I talked about the guide we hired the one day who had the 101 species day. Whether we're with him or without him, we just didn't see hawks. I'm trying to remember if we actually ever saw any raptors other than that owlet, those owlets. I don't know if we actually saw any in Thailand now that I think about it. I mean, I don't know. We probably did. It's unlikely we saw none, but for life of me, I'm not sure why raptors seem so few and far between around there. But we did see this guy, Swinhoe's white-eye. So this is an opportunity to see the real deal. I know that certain times of year, I don't know when, they come around the east side of Santa Barbara, and there's a particular street, at least I heard about it a few years ago, we went over there. I don't remember what street that's on. You probably remember, John. But there's a street where they hang out, and they're around for a little while. And Deanna and I went over there, and we saw 3 or 4 of them in a tree. And I thought that was really cool. And then I think we put it on an eBird, and then we became aware that there's sort of the little controversy, like, oh, you shouldn't put that on eBird. That bird's not legit and all this. I'm like, well, oh, okay. So we got a chance to go over there, and by golly, we saw a Swinhoe's white-eye. I'm like, oh, that one's legit. Like that's the real deal. But I was like, it felt neat to kind of reflect on the fact that we'd seen one in Santa Barbara, and knowing it was like, okay, not really I don't want to say not wanted. I mean, they're still cute and all, but a controversial bird in a sense, but then to go over there and see it in its actual environment, it's kind of like seeing a Eurasian collared dove in its real space and feeling like, no, this is legit. I mean, this is where they kind of belong, and they feel somehow less obnoxious in their actual native habitat. And so we also spent time in Philippines. And we have a friend of ours who is the principal of a school in Manila. And so we made contact with her and said, hey, we're going to come over to the Philippines. Might you be available? And she said, you know what, I'm going to take some time off if you guys would like a personal tour guide. Well, who can turn that down? We never been to the Philippines before. And so we had a really nice time. She took us all over the place. And you can see there I am in the red shirt, and there's Dion in the I guess that's a bluish shirt. And I think that's our friend with her little head poking out. But she played tour guide and showed us around. We didn't see a lot of birds, although we did spend just a morning walking around. I think it's called Manila Bay, and we saw a lot of birds along there. And that was, I think, our only opportunity to really do any birding. But there's an interesting thing we saw along the Manila Bay kind of whatever, the cityscape along the bay there. So we were there in the morning, and we were trying to cross the street to get from where our hotel was over to the water's edge so we could look for birds, coastal birds. But for the life of us, we could not cross the street because there were thousands, I mean, literally thousands of bicycles crossing the street. There are no cars, mind you, thousands of bicycles. And this went on. And Dion and I must have stood there for 15 minutes. And as soon as you get ready to come out, you realize, no, this guy's moving. He's going to run us over. Finally, we decided to go for it. But then we sent people into a panic. And they're slamming on their brakes and almost falling off their bikes. So I don't know what it was, but it seemed to be that, or we kind of picked up, I think, one day a week, they shut down this street right along in front of the ocean in Manila, and it's open for maybe 2 or 3 hours to only bicyclists. And they come out in droves, maybe on a Saturday or something, right? And they come out in droves and they ride their bikes, but there's so many you really can't cross the street without getting killed yourself or one of them, breaking their neck or something. But anyhow, we got out to the water and we saw some cool birds like the collared kingfisher, which I don't think we saw him out by the water. I forget what part of Philippines we saw him in, but for some reason that doesn't feel right along the coast there. But I remember definitely seeing this guy along the coast. They're doing some significant dredging work there right in Manila Bay because erosion has taken away so much. I forget what percentage of the city of Manila now is underwater. So they're trying to pull up all this dirt in order to rebuild. And so who's funding it? The Chinese are. The Chinese are funding it because they want to build condominiums. And so it's a whole real estate investment. So now, I forget now, so much of Manila now has been brought back to life through this whole project being funded by the Chinese. These little zebra doves you see all over Asia, and I just love them. This is another bird sound that I'm particularly drawn to, but I can't possibly recreate it. But anybody who's spent any amount of time at all in Thailand in particular, whether they realize or not, this is probably a sound that was just drilled into their head. It's a very, very distinctive sound, and it's a very Southeast Asian sound. And so South Korea. South Korea, we didn't get a chance to do a lot of birding, but it's not because there wasn't an opportunity to. There are green spaces and some really amazing places to do birding. But when we were there, it was in December. And so mind you, we've been spending time in Southeast Asia, where it pretty much never gets cold, right? I mean, sure, certain areas, north of Myanmar and northern Vietnam can get cold and all that. But generally speaking, it's extremely hot in Southeast Asia almost year round. So we had left Southeast Asia, said, well, let's go over to South Korea and spend some time. It's December. So all we had is like t-shirts and that's it. And we get in Seoul, South Korea, and it's maybe, no exaggeration, it's maybe 20 degrees out. It's really, really cold. And so we had actually come over from Japan before that. And I had it was one of those really cheap, thin plastic, like rain ponchos that you can buy for, a quarter or something in a convenience store. And so I had like a t-shirt on, then you put like a second t-shirt on, then you're wearing your flimsy rain poncho, and it's just not doing the trick. But by golly, we're going to go out and do some birding. So I thought, okay, where are we going to go birding from our hotel? We don't know our way around. Where do we go? So we decided, well, let's get on Google Maps, use the Wi-Fi. Let's get on Google Maps and let's see where there's a public park that we can walk to, and we can go do some birding. And so when we we're looking for public parks. Oh, look, there's a park only like a quarter mile from here. Let's go. Well, how do we get there? Because there are all these streets and stuff. And so we put it in there, and it said something like, oh, it'll take an hour and 30 minutes to get there. We're like, it's like a quarter mile from here, an hour and 30 minutes. We found out why afterward. You're probably all aware of the conflict between North Korea and South Korea, right? It's the most unstable, volatile, scary situation going on in the globe. It's absolutely not a good situation at all. And it's really interesting to be in Seoul, South Korea, know that you're an hour drive away from like total hostility, you know, a country that hates you and has nuclear bombs that they're maybe almost eager to use if you look at them wrong. But anyhow, getting back to the story of why the Google Maps says it was like an hour and a half or something to walk a quarter mile, it's because somehow, I don't know how, somehow they scrambled the information to make it harder for North Korea to have a sense of how South Korea is laid out and all that. They actually scramble, apparently, this is what we were told. They apparently scrambled the data or something so that you don't get a clear idea of how mapping and transportation systems work and all that. And so we're totally perplexed, like, you know what, Dion, I think we can figure this out. So I looked at my phone, I took a snapshot of what the map looked like. I'm like, I'm just going to walk out the door. Easier said than done, actually. It wasn't that easy. All that to say, we found our way to this park. We're there wearing double t-shirt and a flimsy rain poncho. It's like 20 degrees. And of course it's windy and we're trying to find birds. But by golly, we stuck it out for at least 90 minutes to go look at birds. And we saw some cool birds. This might have been the cutest one. Very cute little bird. Very cute. Yeah. Yeah. I told you about the magpies. We saw a variety of them over there. So also decided to go visit Myanmar, formerly known as Burma. And Dion did not go with me on this trip. And so Myanmar is another one of those places. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, but it's a place right now, and for the last couple of years, pretty much every government in the world has told its citizens, do not go to Myanmar. Myanmar is currently engaged in the longest ongoing civil war in the globe. 70 years they've been in civil war. And then when the coup that happened a few years ago, it's completely volatile. And so I had tried to go or wanted to go a number of months earlier. And I said, well, I spent months studying the situation, looking for any indication at all that it was even slightly stable. Like, I'm not going to get killed. Like, I'm actually going to survive this trip. And when I felt like, no, I think I found a part of Myanmar where I can go, where I can slip in and out and have a short trip and experience it and be safe, come back okay, I'm going to go for it. So I decided I was going to do a crossing. I was going to hire a boat driver to take me across this river that connects southern Thailand with southern Myanmar and do it that way. But when I tried to go through immigration to leave Thailand, they demanded a bribe. And as a matter of principle, I thought, no, I'm not going to pay you a bribe for that. And he said, well, then I guess you're not going to Myanmar. So I didn't go to Myanmar. So then a few months later, I'm like, I really want to go to Myanmar. And in all fairness, everybody is saying, don't go to Myanmar. I'm really uncomfortable. I mean, my wife is saying, if you want to go, I support you, but I'm really uncomfortable. I don't think this is a good idea. My dad's saying, don't even tell me when you get back. I don't even want to hear that you're going to Myanmar. I've got friends saying, what are you doing talking about going to Myanmar? You can't be going to Myanmar. Well, so I just went to Myanmar. I decided I'm just going to buy a plane ticket. I'm just going to fly in and see what happens. And I had a fabulous time. Myanmar is great. I absolutely loved it. The culture is so rich. But you're going to find out here in a minute, I think I only had maybe one slide of a bird in Myanmar. And it's not because I only saw one bird in Myanmar. It's because I didn't spend a whole lot of time birding. I'm worried about civil war and not getting blown up. I mean, literally a friend of ours had a bomb detonated at her post office, you know? And so it's like, I'm not here to go birding. I'm here for just kind of a quick cultural experience, just kind of get a sense of this mysterious place that the whole world tells you not to go. You know, sort of thing like, well, if you go, our embassy's shut down. We can't help you. You know, you're on your own over there. All that to say, I had a wonderful trip. Nothing happened. I didn't see a lot of birds because that was something that I wasn't focused on at all. But I made a point to see something like the common myna, which you see all over Asia. This is something we saw 50 times a day, every day for, you know, months and months. But it was still nice to at least do a little tiny bit of birding while I was in Myanmar. And so we also spent some time in Vietnam, which is a fabulous place with a rich culture and really beautiful, highly varied landscapes. Really nice place. On this particular trip, we spent time in Da Nang, not Da Nang. It's called Da Nang. And it's in east central Vietnam, right along the coast. And it's a lot like Santa Barbara, actually. in terms of its aesthetics. It's got a beautiful kind of like arcing coastline with beautiful white sandy beaches and some hills. It's fabulously beautiful, really, really nice spot with really good food. And then just outside of there, we hired a driver for the day, pretty cheap, to take us to some neighboring cities who want to do some looking at birds and explore some other areas. And this is taken from a place called Hyven Pass, which is kind of during the Vietnam conflict or the Vietnam War. This was kind of like the focal area. Everybody was trying to, or I should say, both sides of the conflict were trying to gain control of Hyven Pass. Like this was the corridor from north to South Vietnam or South to North Vietnam. And so whoever had control of this pass had the upper hand in the conflict. And so for that reason, this was absolutely some of the most bloody conflicts in the entire, whatever it was, 17 years or 16 years of the conflict. It happened right in this area. And so it was really sobering to kind of be like, I'm far too young to have been a part of that, but I certainly had family members who were. And so to go there and have a sense of the history and having heard the stories and all the after effects from family members and friends who were part of it, to be there was a pretty rich experience. I mean, Vietnam was fantastic on pretty much every level, including things like this, like cave temples, like literally these huge, sprawling, massive cathedrals, caverns, and you go under there in these elaborate temples and stuff, and like a nun walking around in there. But we also had great birds like this white-rumped shama, I guess you pronounce it. And so this is one of those birds where we weren't there to go bird watching or looking at birds, but we were visiting a particular temple up in the mountains in this little forested area. And when you see a bird like this, it really stands out, right? Because the color is really distinctive. This big white patch, and of course, the color of the belly, and this long, long tail. So that made it very easy for us to identify this bird. And so I still remember exactly the bird we saw the exact tree we saw this bird in. The common tailor bird is a really common bird all throughout Southeast Asia, as is the white-throated kingfisher. And we spent time in Malaysia as we near the end of our slides here. We traveled 5 hours across Malaysia from the city of Kuala Lumpur, which is the capital, down south, and we crossed over into Singapore. Malaysia is a really neat place. It's another big, big country, but we never left peninsular Malaysia. There's also, it's in Borneo and whatnot. But it's a really neat place that has some couple of anecdotes I might share, including we wanted to visit this mosque, which even though the slide is really fuzzy, and that's my fault from just kind of snapshotting it off my prior Facebook account, but we wanted to visit this mosque because this was the first time we'd ever spent time in a predominantly Islamic country. We'd never done that before. And so it was really neat. And the people were mostly really nice and wonderful. The culture was very rich. The food was fantastic, but we weren't allowed to go into the mosque. I think it was just because they closed certain times of the day for prayer and things like that. And so we didn't have an opportunity to go in there. So I think we never visited a present day mosque, although we did have an opportunity to go into an old Hindu cave. I think this was a Hindu temple inside a big sprawling cave there with these monkeys that were all over the place. And these monkeys, as most monkeys are, extremely mischievous, getting in all kinds of trouble. And so I mentioned Instagram earlier. I don't know anything about Instagram. I'm no good with social media. I gave it a little try and I failed at it, but I want to tell a little anecdote about Instagram. And so when I was there, all these monkeys are doing their thing. And so I'm taking videos of these playful little monkeys. And most of the videos are nothing. But one of the videos, the monkey was kind of perched on the handrail, like a railing as you walk up the stairs leading into this temple right here. And so this lady wasn't paying attention. She's looking down, trying to catch her breath from the steep steps. And she reaches up by accident and puts her hand on the monkey. And she looks up and realizes she's about, she's petting a monkey or touching a monkey. And the monkey kind of does this look like, oh, and she pulls back and shrieks. And I thought, oh, that is kind of cute. So what I did was I'd been experimenting with this whole Facebook, Instagram thing, and I've been posting random, not random, but videos of some of these things on Instagram. And usually, they might get a few hundred, 500 views or something like that. So I put this, the picture of the lady touching the monkey, I put it on Instagram, and overnight it had like 2 million views or something. And I was like, whoa, what's going on? So suddenly I thought I was some sort of like internet, social media superstar or whatever. And this actually went on for months. It just kept growing views and views and views and views. And then eventually it gets a lot, the algorithms bury it like, okay, you've had your time. But I thought that was cool. And I got some insight into what draws people. It's just the way you kind of capture a video. And this whole thing, the lady touched the monkey and the monkey had this weird shocked expression and the lady kind of shrieked and it was kind of cute. Anyhow, so for about 2 months, I was famous in this little segment of Instagram. So that was fun.
Oh,
I admit, Paul.
he must have. Tom could take care.
Nah, okay. So I have a quick anecdote about this particular, two anecdotes actually about this particular slide. So here we are in Kuala Lumpur, and we'd never been there before. And again, as I said, that's the capital of Malaysia. And so we had gotten in, I think, the evening before, and then we're just walking through the city trying to explore our way around. And we come down this alley, and there's a 7-Eleven on the corner. And when we step out at the intersection, I look, and there's this massive building that I hadn't seen until that very moment. Now, this picture may not capture it, but I found out that this was the second tallest building in the world. And so to see it, it's absolutely stunning. The contrast of you have this 2-story, or maybe I guess you could argue a 3-story 7-Eleven building, the Hotel Mandarin Pacific, which is, I don't know, maybe at 10 stories. And then you have this extremely tall, massive, massive skyscraper behind it. And it was one of those things that literally you just can hardly take your eyes off of it. I mean, it's really, really tall. But with respect to 7-Eleven, some of you may notice my shirt, my I Love 7-Eleven t-shirt. So I have a real appreciation for things that are absurd. And so when we're in Malaysia, we're in a Chinese market there, actually just a couple blocks away from this particular 7-Eleven. And I saw hanging on a rack an I Love 7-Eleven shirt. And I just thought, how ludicrous. Like nobody in America likes 7-Eleven. Like a lot of people go out of their way to avoid 7-Eleven, myself included. And no knock on 7-Eleven, but it just seems to be kind of the prevailing attitude. And I thought, who in the world would wear a shirt like that? And then a couple months later, we're in Bangkok, and I saw somebody walking down the street wearing not an I Love 7-Eleven t-shirt, but a 7-Eleven t-shirt. I thought, that's so weird. And so then it occurred to me, wait a second, 7-Eleven is an entirely different animal in Asia than it is in the US. In Thailand, and all over Thailand, but particularly in Bangkok, they are like neighborhood markets. And I wouldn't say they're necessarily of a higher quality, but they're just regarded differently. For instance, the block we lived on right in downtown Bangkok, our block had 4 7-Elevens on our block. They're everywhere. They're truly neighborhood markets, and you don't have to walk usually more than about 200 yards to find another one. But when we spent that 2 months walking that 700 miles around Japan, Japanese 7-Elevens are an entirely different caliber. They're like Whole Foods. I mean, you can get really, really good food in Japan at 7-Eleven. And so over time, I started to kind of appreciate 7-Eleven. And I appreciate more so the irony of knowing, like, in the US, this is absurd, but over here, it's kind of a thing, right? So then I started looking for I Love 7-Eleven t-shirts. And in Japan, I'm looking all over Bangkok. I went to street markets looking for them. I couldn't find them anywhere. I'm like, I'm not going back to Malaysia just to buy a 7-Eleven t-shirt. It's not going to happen. And I went into Japan, and we found a secondhand store near that Kamakura Buddha statue I showed earlier. In a little secondhand store, and I went in there. I'm like, they've got secondhand clothes with like American style shirts and whatnot. The best I found was a Make America Great Again shirt. I decided not to buy that. But I never found my 7-Eleven shirt. But by golly, as you can see, I eventually got my hands on it. So I wear it for irony. I don't actually really love 7-Eleven, but I can appreciate in Japan in particular, it's an entirely different animal. And there's something sort of cool about that in a weird sort of way. But I will say, I've heard recently that 7-Eleven they have this new marketing program where they want to kind of elevate their standard a bit more. They want to be more like Japanese 7-Elevens. If you go on YouTube, you can actually see YouTube videos about how awesome Japanese 7-Elevens are. I don't work for 7-Eleven. Pacific Swallow. That may be the only photo I have from there, just simply for reasons that I've said before. And the last couple of slides are from Singapore, the 15th country that we visited on this trip. We didn't spend a lot of time in Singapore because we're mainly in that part of Southeast Asia, simply for Malaysia. But since Singapore is right around the corner, why not take a 5-hour bus ride? We get to see, go south through Malaysia, cross over into Singapore. And we did have we did have kind of a neat experience there. So this sign here gives a sense of Singapore for those who aren't already familiar with its reputation. Imagine many of us remember, I don't know, was it 25 years ago or whatever, where the young, I think it was an American kid, got caned for stealing something or chewing gum or something. You know, Singapore is famous for being extremely strict. Do not violate their laws. And so here you get fined up to $300 and 3 demerit points if you park illegally. I'm not sure what that entails exactly, but it doesn't sound good and I don't want to risk it. But anyhow, it is an extremely safe place. And so while we were there, we left Malaysia, you go across this bridge and you enter Singapore and you immediately have to go to immigration to be brought in. And so we're waiting in line to go through the immigration line. Suddenly somebody starts freaking out in the line behind us. This woman starts screaming and making a big scene. And so naturally you get a little concerned. You start looking over your shoulder and look, there's a little bit of anxiety in the room. And a guy a security guy kind of managing the line in front of us, employee, he kind of picks up on the anxiety. And he literally came up to me and says, "Don't worry, sir, you're in the safest country in the world." And that's all he said. And I just thought that was hilarious, And sure enough, nothing happened. She might be in prison. Anyhow, the last slide is simply this Javan myna. We were only there for a couple of days. We just saw the run-of-the-mill type birds. But that being said, that was our trip to Asia. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. But otherwise, thank you for being a part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question. So do you have a sense, like as a lister, like were you using eBird? Do you know how many species you added to your life list, just roughly over the course of the 14 months?
Yeah. Can Zoom generally pick up on questions in the...
If you repeat the question, that'll be
Okay, do I have a sense of about how many life birds we picked up in Asia? We did put things on eBird, but it was a lot of incomplete checklists, just kind of like incidentals and whatnot. It wasn't a huge number, like not as much as you think like 14 months in Asia should pull in. But I don't, maybe a couple, 200 or 300 or something like that. Not a huge number, but not nothing. I mean, the sort of thing that in like 5 days in Colombia, you could, do better than that, but not bad. Yeah. Any other questions or anything? Anything coming in from Zoom? No? Okay. All right.
So
Well,
did you camp on your walk?
oh, did we camp walking Japan? No. So I'm a longtime hiker. I'd actually spent 15 years of my life was dedicated to being like a mountain bum. I'd sometimes head out 250 days a year to spend time in the wilderness and just exploring backcountry regions and whatnot. All that to say, despite all that history, that lifestyle that went on and on and on for so long, I never liked camping. I hate camping. So I was one of those people that I'd drive somewhere, I'd sleep in my car, and then I would go put in a huge day in the mountains and come back to my car because I just don't want to sleep on the ground. I just don't sleep well. So that being said, I'd long wanted to do something like the Pacific Crest Trail or the Appalachian Trail or something like that. I love the idea of it. It sounds great. The romantic notion of it sounds absolutely fantastic. But I thought, there's no way. I just don't want to sleep on the ground for 6 months or something like that. And then I heard about this particular circuit that we ended up doing in Japan, where people stay in people's homes, like Airbnbs the whole way. I thought, so wait a second, we can do like a 700-mile walk and never have to sleep on the ground? I'm in. So we researched it for a couple of years and we pulled the trigger on it. And actually we went over several months earlier and did like just 1 week of it just to get a feel for it. And it was exquisite. It was great. So to answer your question, no, we never camped. We stayed in hostels, Airbnbs every night. And we went back and finished up the bulk of it, 49 days. And it was great. Slept like a baby. Yeah. So, okay.
Well,
thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
It was fascinating.
My
appreciate it. And here, we'll stop the screen share. And I guess that's it for our meeting. So just a reminder, if you're around on Saturday, come out to Carpinteria Creek. It's sort of like traveling the world, except it's just Carpinteria Creek. And we'll see some neat birds. And hope to see you then, and we'll see you all next month.